The night began with the kind of electricity only The Tonight Show could generate, music blasting, lights swirling, and a studio audience cheering loud enough to shake the rafters. Jimmy Fallon jogged onto the stage with his trademark boyish energy, clapping and laughing as he waved at fans in the front row. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced breathlessly, "a legend is in the house tonight, give it up for Mark Wahlberg." The applause exploded as Mark strode out, relaxed yet powerful, wearing a fitted black tee and jeans that captured his effortless confidence. He shook Jimmy's hand firmly, even pulling him into a friendly bro hug. Everything looked picture perfect on the surface, two longtime friends sharing a moment of Hollywood warmth. But underneath that easy charm was a quiet tension Mark carried with him, one Jimmy didn't notice, until it was too late. As they settled into their seats, cameras zoomed in, and the band faded into silence, the atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Mark leaned back with a slight stiffness in his shoulders, and Jimmy shuffled his cue cards nervously, unaware that he was holding the spark that would soon ignite one of the most shocking live TV confrontations of the year. 2. Jimmy started off with friendly jokes, tossing softball questions about gym routines, childhood mischief, and the chaos of raising kids. Mark played along at first, flashing that familiar smirk and firing off his quick, dry humor. The audience adored it, laughing at every line as Jimmy tried to steer the interview toward a comfortable rhythm. But then Jimmy glanced at his next card, a card he hadn't written, one handed to him only minutes before the show. He hesitated, but his producer nodded urgently from the sidelines. "So, Mark," Jimmy said lightly, "there's been a lot of buzz about that incident on your movie set last month. Reports say you yelled at a stunt coordinator. Any truth to that?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Mark's smile froze. "Buzz," he echoed, raising one eyebrow. Jimmy tried to chuckle. "Yeah, ya know, Hollywood rumors. Just thought I'd give you a chance to clear the air." Mark leaned forward, arms tightening slightly. "If I had something to clear," he replied slowly, "I'd let you know." The audience murmured. The joke hadn't landed. The tension had begun. 3. Sensing the awkwardness, Jimmy attempted to lighten the mood with a giggle and a sip from his mug, but the shift had already cracked something in the air. Mark's expression held an unmistakable warning, one Jimmy should have heeded. Instead, he pressed onward. "Come on, man," Jimmy said with a grin that now looked forced. "You know how these stories get. You've been known to have a temper on set." The word temper hit the room like a cold wind. Mark's jaw flexed. "Temper," he repeated slowly. "You mean standards?" Jimmy blinked, caught off guard. "Hey, I'm not judging. Just reading the cards." Mark leaned back, folding his arms. "Then maybe you should read better ones." Gasps rippled across the audience. Jimmy tried to deflect with another joke, but for the first time that night, the laughter didn't come. Mark wasn't smiling anymore. 4. Trying to regain control, Jimmy pressed on. Okay, let's talk about the new movie." There were also reports. Mark cut him off. "More reports." His voice was firm enough to still the room. Jimmy laughed nervously. "You know how the press is." Mark's stare sharpened. "Do you?" he asked. Jimmy hesitated. Well, sure." Mark shook his head. "No. You get headlines. I get consequences." The audience fell silent. Jimmy swallowed, tugging lightly at his sleeve. "Mark, I'm not trying to attack you." Mark raised a hand. "But you're repeating garbage from people who weren't there." Jimmy's smile dropped completely. "It's part of the interview." Mark shot back, "Then maybe it's time you interview people instead of rumors." The crowd reacted with stunned whispers. Mark's voice wasn't loud, but the restraint in it was more explosive than any shout. 5. Jimmy glanced again at the producer, who mouthed, "Keep going." And so he did, reluctantly, but blindly. "All right," Jimmy said, voice cracking slightly, "last thing on this, I promise," Mark interrupted with a cold laugh. "There's always a last thing with you guys." Jimmy shook his head. "These are just questions, man." Mark leaned forward. "Questions. Or bait." The crowd gasped. Jimmy frowned, losing patience. "You know, Mark, we're just doing our job here." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Your job doesn't need to involve dragging people through tabloids." Jimmy stiffened, his polite mask slipping. "If you're this sensitive, maybe we should switch topics." Mark scoffed. "If I'm sensitive, you bring up nonsense and expect me to smile about it." The tension had reached a visible crackling peak, thick enough to feel even through a screen. 6. Jimmy attempted one final reset. All right, let's rewind, he said with a shaky smile. Tell us about that charity project of yours. People love when you talk about that. Mark stared at him, unmoving. Do you love it? He asked calmly. Jimmy blinked. What? Mark continued, or do you want to pretend to care for 30 seconds before you drag me through another rumor? The audience shifted in their seats, the tension now a living thing. Jimmy exhaled sharply, losing patience entirely. Dude, what do you want from me? It's a talk show. Mark replied, then talk. Don't provoke. Jimmy raised his voice slightly. I'm not provoking you. Mark shot back instantly, then stop acting like it. Gasps erupted again. The studio was no longer a comedy stage. It was a pressure cooker seconds from exploding. 7. Jimmy tried to regain control with humor. Hey, look, we're all friends here, Mark cut him off sharply. Don't do that. Jimmy's eyes widened. Do what? Mark responded, hide behind jokes when things get real. The crowd reacted with a stunned hush. Jimmy sat back, defensive. I'm trying to ease the tension. That's literally my job. Mark shook his head. Your job is to respect your guests. The words hung like a blade. Jimmy's face hardened into something the audience rarely saw, a flash of pride, irritation. You know what, Mark? He said, voice tightening. If you came here ready to explode, that's on you. Mark's eyes went icy. Exploding? You haven't seen me explode. The audience gasped. Jimmy's hand froze mid-motion. The moment was pure, quiet combustion. 8. Mark stood up slowly, adjusting the hem of his shirt with an eerie calmness. The entire room went still. Jimmy scrambled to recover. Whoa, hey, sit down, man, we're just talking. Mark looked at him with a stare colder than steel. We're done talking. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, shocked. Mark, come on. Mark shook his head. You want drama, you got it. The audience watched in disbelief as Mark took one step back from his chair. You disrespect me on live TV and expect me to play along. He said. Jimmy shot back, I didn't disrespect you. Mark's voice dropped to a low, dangerous calm. Roll the playback later. You'll see. A collective gasp filled the room. Jimmy was speechless. 9. The studio audience watched as Mark gave a final glance at the stunned crowd. I came here to talk about my work, he said clearly, not to be ambushed by someone I thought was a friend. Jimmy opened his mouth, but no words came. Mark turned toward the side exit, the tension radiating off him in waves. Security hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. The band sat frozen. Jimmy finally managed, Mark, don't do this. But Mark didn't slow down. We're done, he said without looking back. The audience murmured in disbelief. Jimmy tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow and nervous. The energy in the room had shifted from entertainment to shock. 10. The second Mark disappeared behind the curtain, the studio erupted into whispered chaos. Some audience members cheered in support, others sat stunned, clutching their seats. Jimmy stared at the empty chair, still breathing hard, still processing what had just happened. Ladies and gentlemen, he finally said with a forced smile, Mark Wahlberg. The applause was hesitant, confused, uneven. Jimmy fumbled for the cue cards, his composure hanging by a thread. The cameras panned awkwardly across the stage as the band played him off. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation flooded social media, slow-motion replays, zoomed-in reactions, hashtags exploding. By morning, the world had already taken sides, dissecting every word, every glare, every breath. And just like that, one heated moment had turned into one of the most unforgettable walk-offs in late-night TV history.